Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. So today we're talking about a few cards that are trending on the market because of the brand new Mega Tins. Now every year the tins reprint a bunch of cards from the last year or so, and a lot of the time these reprints are really predictable, both in terms of what's included and what happens to the prices of those reprinted cards. However, there's always some cards that aren't necessarily in the tins itself, but are affected by the reprints, and those are interesting trends for us to take a look at. Before we start, I do know that there's a lagging issue with my camera right now. I'm in the middle of switching over a bunch of my assets, but I'm temporarily using my old computer, so please bear with me for a few episodes here. But yeah, let's get started. Kicking things off, we'll take a look at Mulch Army Purulia. So in the current format, Purulia feels like a card you should be running in your side deck. Even if you're going first, if you're against Vanquished Soul Canine, you can drop this at the start of your turn, and you'll draw a card if your opponent drops a Holisu or an Azuna on you, as well as whenever they tag in a Vanquished Soul monster from the hand. Now, leading up to the release of the tins, Purulia was a very highly in-demand card. However, it started to decline in price once the tins confirmed that the card would get another reprint. However, the falling price was extremely short-lived. The tins reprinted cards, but there was a lot of filler in the tins that didn't really result in much value, so people aren't cracking open the tins as much when they could be just buying the Purulia itself as a single. On top of that, with so many secret rares in the set, you'd have to open a crazy amount of tins just to end up with a playset of Purulia, which a lot of players probably didn't want to do. Because of this, we are seeing the prices of Purulia go up. The tin reprint actually did hit around $30 to $35 shortly after its release, but we now see it jump all the way up to around $45 per copy. That's actually really close to the price of the original secret rares from the Infinite Forbidden, which are around $55 to $60, and then even those ultra reprints from Maze of the Master, which don't look nearly as good, those are in that $40 to $45 range as well. With this one, it seems that Purulia is going to be an expensive card for the foreseeable future. It's probably going to take a reprint in some sort of rarity collection type set, or maybe a structure deck printing if you want to be really optimistic, before we see this card hit a more affordable price point. So there's another card from the tins that I want to talk about, and that's Dominus Purge. Now the Dominus cards Purge and Impulse are really strong, and they've seen quite a bit of play over the last half a year or so. Impulse is obviously strong in Malice and Mitsurugi strategies, while Purge is seeing more play recently in Blue Eyes and Yummy. Purge and Impulse are cards that everyone was super excited to get their hands on with the release of the tins, since they're basically staples you always want to have access to, and everyone was hoping that the tins would make them much more affordable and accessible to the average player. However, just like with Purulia, we've seen both of them actually remain fairly expensive. Purge is the main one I'm looking at because it's currently seeing more play, as Malice is also expected to be hit on the upcoming ban list, while Yummy should make it through relatively untouched. With the original secrets from the Infinite Forbidden, they obviously spiked when Yummy became a deck. They were originally like $35 to $40, they shot up to around $60 to $70, but since then they've fallen to about the $45 to $50 range with the tin reprint incoming. However, with how hard it is to pull Purges, we actually see the reprint version of Purge maintaining a $40 price point, which is why the original printing is really close value-wise and currently sits at $45 per copy. With these cards, it's definitely going to take a different sort of printing to bring the card's price down. I think we're all sort of hoping for another rarity collection type of set that's going to reprint a ton of staples and make the game more accessible for your average player. For now, grab a set of Purges if you do want to play Yummy or maybe even Blue Eyes, but aside from that, I would hold off on investing in too many copies of Purge because it feels inevitable that the card will get another reprint soon. Up next, let's take a look at Primite Dragon Ether Barrel. So this is basically the main card that allows the Primite engine to be so successful. It sets a Drill Beam or Lordly Load from your deck on summon, and it adds itself back to your hand during your standby phase if you have a normal monster on your field or in your graveyard. Now the Primite engine is one that has actually been pretty successful. It's mainly been used by the Blue Eyes deck, which was a very strong contender before the release of Justice Hunters, but I know that some people have also looked at putting the cards into random decks. I think there are variants of Draco Tail that play the Primite engine so they can use Dark Magician to go into Dragoon, and there was also some Yummy builds that were playing that old normal monster called Vanilla. Now, all of the Primite cards did get a reprint in Battles of Legend Monster Mayhem, and that made Ether Barrel and Drill Beam extremely cheap, though Lordly Load was still actually quite difficult to pull there. Now, however, the tins have sort of flipped this all around. the tins reprinted Lordly Load, making it much more accessible, but they completely forgot about Ether Barrel. This has actually resulted in the prices sort of swapping. The Lordly Loads were at $30 for those Battles of Legend secrets. They're now down to $15, while the tin reprints are at $10. However, Ether Barrels went from being $5 or $6 to now sitting at $15 per copy. Looking back, this should have been obvious because Ether Barrel came out in Supreme Darkness, which is just past the cutoff of what should have been reprinted in the tins, so in hindsight it does sort of make sense. This is an interesting price jump. I think it may have been easy to overlook those Ether Barrels from Monster Mayhem after that reprint. However, it's definitely a card you guys will want to keep an eye on, especially if you are considering any deck that uses the Primite engine in the future, just in case it has a bit of a showing. Ether Barrels are going to be a card that have the potential to spike because there's so much less of them on the market. Alright, another fairly straightforward one, we have LZ, Azamina of the White Forest. Now this is obviously a card for the White Forest strategy. You reveal it to special summon a White Forest or Azamina from your hand. It lets you fuse for an Azamina fusion while it's on the field, and then finally, if it's used as a synchro material, you search for a Sinful Spoils card from your deck. Now in the tins, two of the expensive pieces of the White Forest deck in LZ and Esteller actually both got reprinted. Now they are secret rares, but the White Forest deck isn't particularly popular and isn't seeing too much demand, so those reprints should be reasonably cheap and affordable. Aside from that, a lot of the other cards that you play in the White Forest strategy are fairly low rarity. The one card missing that wasn't reprinted is LZ, Azamina of the White Forest. This is something that I think they'll generally just play at one, though I did see a couple of lists that were playing multiple copies. However, this new LZ was printed in Supreme Darkness, just like Ether Barrel, so it misses the cutoff and wasn't reprinted this year. In terms of price, LZ was a pretty cheap card, coming in at only $3 or so before. The set itself, Supreme Darkness, wasn't too great aside from like Meowls and Mitsurugi Ritual. LZ was worth a bit when the set came out, however it tanked in price pretty quickly. However, with all of the rest of the cards for the strategy now being much more accessible, we've seen LZ triple in price as it currently sits at around $9 to $10 on TCG Player. Overall, I don't feel like White Forest is a very scary deck at all. It doesn't feel like it does that much and it's weak to a lot of hand traps. I'm expecting LZ to fall back down to around $5 or $6 within a couple of weeks, so I definitely recommend trying to offload your extra copies of this LZ while it is seeing some hype. Okay, so this one's probably pretty unexpected. It's Trident Dragion. Now, aside from being this giant OTK machine that Tenpai Dragons could use to end games with, Trident Dragion is probably best known for the whole Ask a Friend meme when it came to expensive cards. This card was a very important extra deck option when Tenpai Dragons were one of the better decks in the game, capable of winning games quickly and not giving your opponent much of a chance to play. Now, of course, the deck is a lot worse because they have multiple cards limited to one. As a result, the cards are actually more of an engine. I do see some decks trying to side in the engine when you're going second, or maybe you just hold back on the cards until you use your main engine to burn through your opponent's board. It hasn't really seen too much play recently. However, the 2025 tins still actually reprinted some Tenpai cards, including Pydra and Genroku, which were the two cards from the deck that were a little bit pricier and harder to find. As a result, some players are just thinking to get all of the cards together and have them available as an engine just in case they decide to try and play it in something, and that's causing some movement with the price of Trident Dragion. Aside from all of the Dragion's older printings, the most notable one is the reprint that it received in last year's Megatins. That reprint brought the card down to being only a few dollars, and recently the card has been around $6 or so. However, there has been a small bump up in the demand of Trident Dragion within the last couple of weeks, and it now sits at right around $10 per copy on TCG Player. I don't think that this is something there's going to be that much demand for, since I don't think it'll see any competitive success. However, you can definitely throw them into your trade binder and hopefully still get some good value out of it as players look to get the entire core together as they're opening the tins. Okay, so to wrap things up, we're taking a look at a couple of cards that aren't related to the tins, the first one here being DD Count Surveyor. So the DDD theme is getting new support in the upcoming core set Doom of Dimensions, and the support actually looks really strong. Maybe not tier 1, but it will be a solid tier 2 strategy that can build big boards as well as play through interruptions. Count Surveyor is a starter for the deck since you can discard another DD monster to special summon this card from your hand, then search for a DD monster with 0 attack or defense, which is probably going to be Kepler. With this one, I'm not too sure how many copies people will end up playing in their decks. A lot of lists that I saw were only running 1 copy, but some were playing 3, and I feel like 3 isn't horrible because this card gets you to your starter. We'll have to wait and see what happens with some successful lists early on. However, Count Surveyor is a fairly new card from Battles of Legend Monster Mayhem, and it was actually one of the short printed secret rares in that set. For those that paid attention when the set dropped, they were grabbing Count Surveyors at only a couple of dollars each. However, now that the DDD support should be coming out in just a couple of weeks, we now see Count Surveyors all the way up at $10 per copy. Hopefully you grabbed your copies of Surveyor early on if you are interested in playing the deck. This card's price could go up or down depending on the performance of DDD over the next couple of months, but it's something that probably isn't going to see a reprint anytime soon. And finally, the last card we're taking a look at for today is Spiritual Water Art Owie. So this is something that we've actually looked at quite a few times on Market Watch in the past. It's a simple trap where you tribute a water monster to look at your opponent's hand and send 1 card from their hand to the graveyard. Looking at your opponent's hand can be extremely powerful since you get to know how to play out your turn and play through their interactions as well as what to set up so that you can stop your opponent the following turn. Cards like a Pointer of the Red Lotus, which has a very similar effect, have been banned in the past. Now, it seems that Water Art Owie is getting some attention as a tech for the Sky Striker strategy. They're able to tribute off Shizuku, which happens to be a water, and you do this after your Shizuku search during the end phase. This is a tech that I believe was used at Worlds. I don't know if it's seen play since then. There might be something else that players are trying to do with this card. Maybe something like Crystron could try it out since they do have water monsters in their deck as well. I haven't seen any successful lists popping up with this card recently. But yeah, this card has seen maybe like 5 or so buyouts over the last few years, but it always ends up coming back down in price. The thing is, the card never receives a holo reprint, so the buyouts keep happening. This buyout is always with the Astral Pack super printing since it's the card's only holo version. The card was around $6 or $7 before. We have a bunch of sold listings of the card at around $15 to $20 right now. Technically, the cheapest one on TCG Player is $45 or $50, and there's supposedly 3 sold at $50 per copy. I definitely think that's some sort of people trying to manipulate the market, and I wouldn't really pay too much attention to that. However, if you do have these, definitely throw them into your trade binder, try to offload them as soon as possible, since the card will definitely come crashing back down to reality in a couple of weeks as players gradually list their copies back onto the market. Alright guys, that is all I have for today's episode. Definitely really interesting to see how the tins are affecting the rest of the market. I'm kind of bummed out because our tins did get delayed. A bunch of OTS stores in Canada should be all getting them this week, so finally we can crack some open. But you know, it would have been nicer to open them a little bit earlier on so I could know what to order. But it is what it is. I'm planning on keeping a lot of the stuff from the tins itself anyway, so that's not going to affect me too much. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's Market Watch episode, please make sure you let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. Make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.